Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. I'm your host, Joe, and as always, I'm joined by my college friend, Mark. Together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hopefully figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. How's it going, Mark?
It's going pretty well. No wildfires to complain about this week. The weather is starting to shift into fall, and lately we've been discussing whether it's been easy enough to deal with COVID restrictions working at home if the weather is nice and sunny and you can go out for a walk every day, and if it's going to be more challenging once the weather starts getting cold and wet. But I guess we're just going to see about that.
Yeah, the weather here in New York is beautiful. October's the nicest weather month here. But I must say I'm groggy because I've been staying up way too late watching postseason baseball and toggling between baseball games and debates the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, your two favorite sports.
Yeah. So I asked you a question last time. With the memory of the outsized impact of third-party candidates like Ralph Nader and Jill Stein on recent presidential elections, I got to thinking about this year's highest profile third-party candidate, which led to the following two-part question for you. Is Kanye West going to be the next president of the United States? And if not, then is Kanye's candidacy likely to play a spoiler role in the presidential race between Trump and Biden? What did you find?
I found a lot of interesting things to talk about. So let's talk about Kanye West. For those in our audience who have been living in a cave and may not know who he is a rapper, record producer, and fashion designer who has sold more than 20 million albums and 140 million singles worldwide and won a total of 21 Grammy Awards. He is also one of those people who I think you can say is famous for being famous, married to Kim Kardashian, and the subject of a number of news stories because of what is pretty consistently erratic behavior. So let's focus on the first question first, and we can answer that one pretty quickly and easily, and the answer is no, Kanye West will not be our next president. And I could say that because he's barely running for president in the first place. So far, he's held only one campaign rally, which was in South Carolina. And it was kind of a train wreck in which at one point he berated Harriet Tubman as a woman who didn't free slaves, but just delivered them into a different type of bondage to the white man. I'm pretty sure that no one in attendance showed up that day hoping that they could get Kanye West's take on Harriet Tubman. It was probably an issue that he didn't need to go into. And then later at the same event, he burst into tears while revealing that his wife had considered aborting their first child. So here we should talk about the elephant in the room. Kanye West is a man who appears to be struggling with his mental health. He was at one point hospitalized with what was described as paranoid delusions. At the time, that was diagnosed as a temporary psychosis due to lack of sleep and dehydration. But since then, there's been much speculation that he is bipolar.
Well, I think his wife mentioned as much in one of her mea culpa statements after something about his candidacy, didn't she?
She did. And Kanye responded by basically rejecting the idea. It's not unusual among bipolar people to think that others are forcing a diagnosis upon them. And if it is, in fact, that he's manic depressive, Kanye West would seem to be typical in this regard. But otherwise, he's not running political commercials on television or radio. He's not being interviewed on Fox or CNN. And most recently, the reports are that he was on vacation. So we can say that he's not going to win the election because he's not doing any of the things that you need to do in order to win elections. There's an even more simple reason why he's not going to be the next president, because he's not on enough state ballots. He's on the ballot in only 12 states. Joe, do you think you can name the 12 states that he's on?
Oh, I have no idea. And one of the reasons I asked you this question is because I wanted to know how many state ballots he's on. I know there was a lot of talk about him trying to get on the ballot in swing states like Wisconsin, but I don't know if he was successful. So why don't you fill us in?
He is on the ballot in 12 states, as I said: Arkansas, Colorado, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Minnesota, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Utah, and Vermont. He was not on the ballot in Wisconsin. He missed the deadline reportedly by 18 seconds, or actually his campaign workers did.
Okay, so I didn't hear you say Wyoming, which is his home state now. I think he lives in Cody, Wyoming.
Yeah.
And I did not hear you say Illinois. He grew up in Chicago, so that's interesting that he's not on this ballot in the two states that arguably he'd have the best chance of scoring some points in.
Yeah, he did not try to get on the ballot in every state. Sometimes on Twitter, he is advocating for people to write him in as a candidate, but he's only officially on the ballot in those 12 states. By winning those 12, he would receive a total of 84 electoral votes, which is far short of the total needed to win outright. For those of you doing the electoral math at home, if you add up the electoral votes of all 50 states, the total is 538. Later, I'll be mentioning the website 538.com, and that's where their name comes from. It's the total number of electoral votes. So if Kanye were to secure the maximum number of electoral votes that he can, or 84, that would leave 454 votes still outstanding. And even if Trump and Biden split them evenly, they'd both have 227. And my study of mathematics tells me that 227 is greater than 84. So no, Kanye West is not going to be the next president. So, short of the other two candidates bowing out of the race, there's no way for Kanye West to be our next president, which is, by the way, the reason he wasn't included in the first presidential debate and won't be included in the second, because the debates are only open to candidates who are on enough ballots to win the election. And I did not know that, so that's something new I learned in the process of researching this.
Interesting.
So your second question, whether Kanye will influence the outcome of this election, is more difficult to answer. But before we do that, let's take a pop quiz. First question, Joe. Is Kanye West a registered Democrat, Republican, or Independent?
I don't know, but if he even votes, I would guess he's a registered Republican, and I say that only because he's expressed approval for Donald Trump numerous times in the past.
You are right. He is a registered Republican. So second question. He's running as neither a Democrat nor a Republican. What is the name of his political party?
That I know. The Birthday Party.
You're right again. Do you know what the name means?
No, I don't. I was hoping you would tell me.
It is the birthday party because Kanye says if he wins, it'll be everybody's birthday.
Ah.
I'm expecting cake. If I don't get cake, Kanye is going to hear from me. I think that's a reasonable expectation on my birthday.
Right.
Come on, Kanye. And third question, he's currently 42 years old. How often has he voted since he reached voting age?
I'm going to guess 0, but I don't know. Maybe that's too cynical. 0.
Joe, you are killing it today. You are right again. He has never voted. So he's never voted for anybody, not for the man he calls his brother, Donald Trump, not for Obama, and not for their opponents either. But he would like you to vote for him. And maybe this is the year for him, Joe. Maybe now that he's on the ballot in those 12 states, though you have a good point there. If he's not on the ballot in his home state, then he will not have an opportunity to vote for himself. So maybe his string continues. But we swing back to question number 2, and there is a long history of third-party presidential candidates. In fact, there's a Wikipedia article that lists 46 third-party candidates, 12 of whom managed to get more than 5% of the popular vote. And the all-time champion third-party candidate was Teddy Roosevelt in 1912, who ran on the Progressive Party. He was their candidate and snagged more than 4 million votes and 88 electoral college votes, which was good enough for second place behind Woodrow Wilson.
And I believe the incumbent president finished 3rd in that election.
Yes, he did. Roosevelt had been very popular as president prior to that, and he'd been succeeded by William Taft as the Republican Party's nominee and president. But he was unhappy with some policy decisions that Taft made, and so he decided to run again. He was denied the nomination of the Republican Party. Taft got that again, but he decided to run against Taft as an independent, and he didn't come close to winning, but he did guarantee that Woodrow Wilson would be the next president instead of Taft being reelected. So no recent third-party candidate has come close to finishing as high as second in the election, but some of them have had an effect on the election that might have outweighed their percentage of the vote. Ross Perot, for instance, ran for president as an independent in 1992. That was the year that Bill Clinton ran against the older George Bush. And according to polls, the vast majority of his supporters were white folk who didn't go to college and who might have voted Democratic previously, but were disaffected with the party. And 24 years later, Trump would tap into the same demographic demographic on his way to the White House. So Perot was a billionaire who self-funded his campaign, and he was actually ahead in some early polls. But he famously dropped out of the race in July before re-entering it in October. And he ended up getting about 19% of the vote, so a very strong showing. But it wasn't enough to win any individual state, so he got 0 electoral votes. After Clinton won, many Republicans complained that Perot had siphoned off enough Republican voters to throw the election to the Democrat. But analysts after the fact showed that Perot's support came pretty equally from Democrats and Republicans, and the majority of his voters lived in parts of the country that one of the other two candidates had won easily, so it's actually unlikely that he changed the electoral outcome. That brings us to Ralph Nader, the political activist, author, and lawyer who ran for president 5 times in 92, 96, 2000, 2004, and 2008. And the most notable time was 2000 when he was the Green Party's candidate. In that election, he finished with 2.74% of the popular vote. In Florida that year was decided by a razor-thin margin of only 537 votes. You'll remember, of course, that this was the infamous case that went to the Supreme Court, where the Al Gore campaign was suing for the right to a recount of the votes, and the George W. Bush campaign was suing against it, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Bush, throwing the election to him. So Florida decided by 537 votes. Nader that year received over 97,000 votes in Florida. But he disputed after the fact that he helped Bush to win. A 2003 study, though, found that his candidacy was a critical factor in Bush's victory. And a 2004 study found that Nader voters had the profile of likely voters with a preference for Democratic candidates who would likely have voted for Gore over Bush in the absence of Nader's candidacy.
Yeah. Gore appeared to a lot of voters as kind of warmed over Bill Clinton, moderate Democrat, milquetoast, same old type of thing. And it doesn't surprise me at all to hear that Nader's voters were disproportionately keyed up to vote for somebody more progressive than that. And I think it has a lot of echoes in today's election. You know, this is precisely why an ardent progressive has not gotten into the race, for fear that it would throw the election to Trump.
Yeah, I think it's the eternal question for potential candidates like that. Does their candidacy help drive the Democratic Party more to the left in pursuit of the votes that, for instance, a Green Party candidate would receive? Or does it siphon off votes and assure victory to a candidate from the other party who would be much, much worse? And in Nader's case, there's some controversy over what his intentions were. He was quoted as saying that Bush's victory would, quote, mobilize us, unquote, and that environmental and consumer regulatory agencies would fare better under Bush than Gore. He also said, quote, if you want the parties to diverge from one another, have Bush win. And on the question of whether he'd feel regret if he caused Gore's defeat, he replied, quote, not at all. There may be a cold shower for 4 years that would help the Democratic Party. It doesn't matter who is in the White House. So after 8 years of George W. Bush and now 4 years of Trump, I, for one, feel like it does kind of matter who's in the White House. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I can't help thinking that Nader's statement reminds me of a lot of the Bernie or bust people who really, it suspends credulity to think that they would believe there's no difference between the two candidates running in 2016 or 2020 for that matter. There most certainly is a huge amount of difference.
Right.
To give your vote to a third party in a year like this is, you may as well throw it in the toilet.
So the verdict here is that the Nader campaign in 2000 certainly did affect the outcome of the election, and it seems like it was maybe Nader's intention to do so, though he might not have intended the ultimate outcome of that election. Which brings us to Jill Stein. She first ran for president as a Green Party nominee in 2012, but 2016 is the bigger story. Stein finished 4th with over 1.4 million votes, more than the previous 3 Green tickets combined, and 1.07% of the popular vote, and played a significant role in several crucial battleground states, drawing a vote total in 3 of them, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, that exceeded the margin between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Later in December 2018, 2 reports commissioned by the U.S. Senate found that the Russian-fronted Internet Research Agency boosted Stein's candidacy through social media posts targeting African-American voters in particular. In 2015 and 2016, there had been over 100 favorable stories about Stein on Russian state-owned media networks. And she's long been criticized for her support of international policies that mirror Russia's foreign policy goals, such as dismantling the U.S. military, dissolving NATO. She's described Russia as a victim of NATO aggression. She supported Russia's activities in the Ukraine. She speaks for non-intervention internationally, and she's pro-Brexit, just to round it out. So almost certainly the Stein campaign had an effect on the 2016 election, and it seems pretty clear that she was one of Russia's useful idiots in that election, along with Donald Trump himself.
Huh. I remember seeing a photograph of her at some state dinner in Russia, the same one that Michael Flynn attended, where she was at Putin's table with Flynn.
I don't think anyone has suggested that Stein is a cover agent. She's not likely to align herself intentionally with someone as harshly autocratic as Putin, but she is the sort of person who can be hoodwinked into supporting things that are consistent with what Putin would like to see.
You know, I just want to say this. We've been trashing Ralph Nader and Jill Stein the last few minutes, but I just want to make a case for what their voters must have been thinking at the time they voted for them. There is a large, growing constituency of left-wingers, progressives, who do believe that incremental change is not good enough and did genuinely believe that there wasn't enough of a difference between the two major party candidates to warrant their voting for the lesser of two evils. And hindsight is 2020. We know now that the voters for Nader, particularly in Florida, tilted the election to George W. Bush, and that Stein's voters tilted the election to Trump in Wisconsin in 2016. But we didn't know that then. And this constituency of progressives is still alive and still growing in this country. And there's something to be said when progressives have to constantly eat their words, swallow their convictions, and vote for the milquetoast centrists instead of getting the president they want. Why do right-wingers get the president they want and left-wingers aren't allowed to get the president they want? You know, there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone understands that Bill Clinton took the Democratic Party towards the center on a number of issues, and that was a very long time ago. And there hasn't really been a ardently progressive presidential nominee from the Democratic Party since McGovern in 1972. And so the beat goes on. Like, do you attempt to work within the Democratic Party and push it left because Democratic candidates have the chance to be elected to nationwide office? Or do you work through a third party and attempt to build that movement to a point where the Democratic Party needs to come to the table and adopt some of your planks in order to hold on to your voters? And I'm not sure that there's a 100% clear answer to that. I can see arguments both for and against either one of those positions.
And I think the bargain that a lot of progressives are making this year, aided and abetted by Joe Biden's very own words, are that he is a bridge to get us out of this mess we're in now with the Trump disaster and bring us to a place where he can pass the proverbial baton to a true progressive in 2024 or 2028, depending on whether he serves for one term or two, if he wins.
But 2016 provide a recent template that in a close election, when some states are decided by narrow margins, a third-party candidate who siphons votes from one party's candidate can determine the outcome of the Electoral College. And if you're a campaign manager and it's essentially impossible for your controversial candidate to win the popular vote, then your best chance at winning might be to do some Electoral College magic by turning the other party's narrow advantage in some states into a narrow deficit by way of encouraging a third-party candidate. And in the case of Kanye West, that seems to be the whole point of the people who worked to get him on the ballot. Because reports are it was Republican operatives at the state level who were doing the grassroots organization and signature collection to get him on the ballot.
Yes, and not just reports. I think they have pictures, video of Republican lawyers running into state offices to deliver signed petitions to get Kanye on certain ballots in certain states.
So all of this raises an interesting question. Is the Kanye West campaign a conspiracy orchestrated by the White House? And is Kanye in on it? The fact that Republican operatives in numerous states are stepping forward to get West on the ballot suggests that someone is orchestrating this at the national level. And by the way, just recently, Kanye West met with Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, and Trump himself has been quasi-supporting his campaign. As for the latter, whether or not Kanye West knows that his entire campaign is just a hoax, it's hard to say. But Forbes magazine did ask him whether his campaign was intended to hurt Biden, and West responded, quote, "I'm not denying it," unquote. So let's take a look at the Kanye West campaign and see if it's in a good position to play spoiler. Why might people want to vote for him? When I'm voting for a political candidate, I like to take a look at what they stand for. Kanye's policy goals are pretty vague and contradictory. His campaign website, which you can visit at kanye.country, there is a single webpage with 10 policy goals listed, each of which is matched with a Bible verse. So the policies are all listed under the heading, quote, "creating a culture of life," unquote. Policy number 1. Restore faith and revive our constitutional commitment to freedom of religion and the free exercise of one's faith, demonstrated by restoring prayer in the classroom, including spiritual foundations. Number 2, restore the sound national economy, reduce household debt and student loan debt. Number 3, provide leadership to restructure our country's education system to serve the most at-risk and vulnerable populations, allowing the widest possible range of educational and vocational paths to job opportunities and career success. Number 4, maintain a strong national defense, fully prepared but not so quick to tie up our country's young men and women in foreign quagmires that do not advance our national interest and which last for decades. Number 5, reform the legal system to provide true justice, equitable for all citizens, regardless of race or ability to defend oneself in court. Recognize the disparity in verdicts and prison sentences caused by the lack of financial resources or legal assistance. Number 6, reform the approach to policing in a manner that treats all Americans the same, regardless of race, color, or ethnicity. Refocus police forces on real crime. Eliminate federal sentencing guidelines that tie the hands of judges, resulting in ridiculous sentences for the most minor offenses. Number 7, take care of the environment, diligently pursuing clean air and water as a national security priority and making renewables top priority. Number 8, ensure that we always place Americans' best interests first and foremost in dealing with foreign affairs. We must project strength, not aggression. We want trust, but we must also verify. We want fair trade, not one-sided deals that hurt American workers. Number 9, support faith-based groups to provide vital local services, giving communities a shared purpose in government. And number 10, creativity and the arts can be an important source of innovation and development of other national strengths and resources. So, now that you know his 10-point plan, how would you characterize Kanye West, his political affiliation?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't agree with everything he says, and I'm an ardent liberal, but I think this is largely a pro-people agenda he's got. You know, police reform, judicial reform, pro-environment, reducing household debt. Those are all good things. And one other thing, I think a whole culture of life aspect of his candidacy sounds more intellectually consistent to me than the current Republican policy or platform, if you can even call it that, of Republicans basically support life from conception until birth, and then you're on your own, buddy. And it sounds like Kanye's agenda is a more consistent version of a culture of life than the Republican Party's version. I mean, those are the two top-line reactions I have.
Yeah, it's certainly a mixed bag. There's the call for prayer in schools. There's the strong defense and non-intervention. There's the support for faith-based groups. Those are conservative calling points. And then there's the environmentalism. There's criminal justice reform. He's like grabbing items from various different orientations. And so it's hard to really pin him down based on this one page.
Yeah. And I'm reacting to this in real time, having not heard his platform, but it seems to me that this is basically what a lot of people were hoping would be Donald Trump's actual governing platform. Because Donald Trump himself in 2016 said a lot of things that countered Republican dogma and seemed populist, sometimes in good ways. And Kanye's got a lot of that in his own platform. So I think the question is, can anyone actually govern like this? If he were to win, could he really thumb his nose at both sides and govern
Right.
up the middle the way this platform implies?
Yeah, and I think can he govern is a key question, because there are other times when he talks about the style that he would take to the White House. There's really no other word to describe it but incoherent. Here's from a July 2020 Forbes interview, an extended quote. A lot of Africans do not like the movie Black Panther and representation of themselves in Wakanda. But I'm going to use the framework of Wakanda right now because it's the best explanation of what our design group is going to feel like in the White House. That is a positive idea. You got Kanye West, one of the most powerful humans. I'm not saying the most, because you got a lot of alien-level superpowers, and it's only collectively that we can set it free. Let's get back to Wakanda. Like in the movie in Wakanda, when the king went to visit that lead scientist to have the shoes wrap around her shoes, just the amount of innovation that can happen, the amount of innovation in medicine, like Big Pharma, we're going to work, innovate together. This is not going to be some Nipsey Hussle being murdered. They're doing a documentary. We have so many soldiers that die for our freedom of information, that there is a cure for AIDS out there. There is going to be a mix of Big Pharma and holistic, unquote. I don't know about you, but I cannot find anything in that passage that sounds like anything other than someone in the grip of a manic episode.
Yeah, I'm trying to be as charitable as I can, but it really does seem like his mind he's focusing on make-believe, And also it just occurs to me, this is more of the celebrification of politics,
Yeah.
The fact that a person like Kanye West even believes he can be president is a symptom of the same disease that had Donald Trump throw his hat in the ring 5 years ago. Why is it that we so devalue expertise and professional experience?
Yeah.
A lot of the things that Biden brings to the table are so devalued today that people who are builders, con men, rappers, fashion designers actually seriously, genuinely believe they can be president. It's just kind of mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, not just that they can be president, but that he should be president. That there's no one out there who would be better.
Yeah.
That no one out there who's put in the time, put in the work, learned the skills, developed deep insight into the problems facing this country and the solutions that might work. Just the fact that you can record a song one day and then decide to be president the next, it's a devaluing of the sort of commitment that it takes to actually affect change in this country.
And maybe the fact that he's at 1% in the polls is a signal that the American people have finally grown wise to the risks of supporting these non-politicians like Trump, because they're clearly unqualified to be president.
Well, I think, at least in the circles I run, people are ready to see a responsible government again. I think we've seen 4 years of what it is like to be run by people who believe that the government should essentially be dismantled. And when you are confronted by things of the scale of COVID-19, you need someone in charge who's actually prepared to do something in response to a crisis rather than just write it out and treat it like a public relations challenge. So swinging back around to Kanye, there's enough in his policy planks to catch the eye of conservatives. And in fact, he has been showing some appeal among Christian conservatives. New York Magazine talked to one of the women who had been designated as an elector by the Kanye West campaign. Her name is Catherine McGurvey. She lives in Cleveland, Ohio. And she said she was attracted to West by, quote, his new Christian values. She described herself as ardently pro-life, but with ambivalent feelings about the incumbent president. Quote, I do love Donald Trump, but I'm not sure if I trust him right now. I think we need somebody more focused on God. Trump took us a long way. I think Kanye can go farther. And this isn't exactly Joe Biden's base of support. This isn't like a Green Party campaign that is only likely to attract support from people who otherwise are going to vote Democratic.
Right.
It's entirely possible that Kanye could take as many or more votes from Trump as he does from Biden. But then there's the third argument, which seems to be the primary rationale for Republican operatives to be supporting Kanye's campaign, which is that as a famous black man, he's automatically going to attract support among black Americans.
Sure.
And there's this consistent narrative when talking about Joe Biden that black voters are not enthusiastic about his candidacy and will abandon him if given a better option. But the fact is he performed quite well among black voters in the primaries. According to exit polls, he won 60% of black voters in Texas and North Carolina, 61% in South Carolina, 63% in Virginia, and a whopping 72% in Alabama. And that was before he appointed Kamala Harris, a black woman, as his running mate. So these black voters who are supposed to abandon Biden for Kanye simply because he's black are the same ones who didn't vote for black candidates like Cory Booker in the primary. And it seems like maybe, possibly, black voters consider things other than skin color when they're deciding who they support.
Yes, black voters are not this monolithic group that people on the left and the right think they are. You know, a lot of black Democrats are more conservative on issues like abortion than white Democrats are. So I think there is a constituency of black people who could support conservatives and a culture of life, as long as that culture of life also means breaking the cycle of incarceration and being against capital punishment, not just against abortion. I think there's a potential constituency for those kind of appeals, but neither party is exploiting that.
Yeah, potentially, but it's complicated by the fact that Kanye isn't coming to this race as a blank slate. He spent the past few years publicly aligning himself with Trump, and he said some pretty harsh things about the black community. In 2018, he gave an interview to TMZ in which he called slavery a choice by black people. And so it's a pretty good bet that most black voters are already aware of these things. And in fact, polls indicate he doesn't have any greater support within the black community than otherwise. He's right around 2%. So the idea that black people will vote for Kanye just because he's black sounds like the expectation of someone who believes black voters are single-issue voters who are easily fooled and manipulated, which, now that I've said that out loud, sounds pretty much what I would expect of today's GOP.
Right. Agreed.
But just for fun, let's look at the electoral map. If you look at the 12 states where he's on the ballot and consider 538.com's weighted averages of state-level polling, 9 of the 12 are solidly in Trump's column already.
I want to drill down on this because I was furiously scribbling the names of those states as you said them. And looking at this, I see one clearly blue state, which is Vermont. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 clearly red states. Kentucky, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Utah, Idaho, Mississippi, Tennessee. And then 3 arguable swing states in Iowa, Colorado, and Minnesota. So if we were to adopt the theory that of Kanye West as not serious candidate to win, but serious spoiler, it seems like his performance in Iowa, Colorado, and Minnesota is probably what matters the most to the fate of this year's election, wouldn't you say?
Oklahoma, Idaho, Kentucky, Arkansas, Utah, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi. All of those are Trump states. And they're Trump states by a wide margin. The narrowest margin is Mississippi, where Trump's leading by 12.2 points. The biggest margin is Oklahoma, where Trump is leading by a whopping 27 points. So in those cases, it doesn't matter what effect Kanye has. The margin is just too broad to have much of an impact on the election. And if Kanye does pull votes from Biden in those states, as GOP operatives are hoping, it would just make Trump's winning margin a bit bigger. The other 3 are Vermont, Colorado, and Minnesota. And Biden is more than 30 points ahead in Vermont, so we can toss that one on the pile as well. It's well outside the range of any effect that Kanye voters could have, unless those polls are wildly inaccurate. So only Colorado and Minnesota are Biden states in which the race is somewhat close, and Biden actually has a solid lead in both. He's up 8 points in Minnesota and 11 in Colorado. So with Kanye polling at between 1% and 2%, either his support will need to be several times greater than that, or Biden's support will need to be substantially lower for the third-party effect to come into play.
Didn't you also mention Iowa?
He is on the ballot in Iowa, and Trump is currently leading by 2.9 points.
Right, so that's probably the best chance for Kanye West candidacy to have any semblance of spoilerhood.
Right. Yeah. If it comes down to Trump needing Iowa to be elected and Kanye pulls enough votes to throw the state to Biden, then that would, in fact, be the effect. I have
Right.
kind of been assuming here that we're looking at whether or not Kanye would affect a Trump re-election, but it's also possible that the effect could go the other way.
Right. Yeah, that sounds right to me. All I would say is that Colorado and Minnesota were much closer until the last month or two. I think because the Trump campaign is frankly imploding before our very eyes. So Kanye may have had a spoiler's chance in those two states not too long ago.
So that kind of brings us to the answer to the second question. At this point, it does seem unlikely that Kanye's campaign is going to influence the outcome of the election. For him to have an effect, most likely the polls would need to be significantly wrong and quite a bit closer than it appears to be right now, which is entirely possible. There's always a margin of error within these polls. But at this point, all the evidence indicates that it's not going to be close enough for a third-party candidate to determine the outcome.
I completely agree and am persuaded by your assessment today. In my own defense, if it's even necessary, I've been thinking about this Kanye question since he threw his hat in the ring in July, and I think it probably was a more relevant question back then in July and August, before recent events have really scuttled the presidential race and made it much more of a certainty of Biden winning, you know?
Yeah, definitely things have not been going Trump's way lately. And, there's still time. We've got, about a month left to go on it. There's still time for things to change, but there's been a lot of good news for the Biden campaign lately, which makes the scenario that we're considering here increasingly unlikely unless Trump manages to turn things around.
Yes. Well, I'll take that as good news as a Biden voter. That's good news.
Yeah. So not winning the election in 2020 is unlikely to be the end of Kanye's presidential ambitions. And it was probably wrong-headed of me to look at his campaign through the lens of policy. He's not running a policy campaign. It's more of a protest campaign. He's been very strong in his denunciation of the Democratic Party in general and Biden in particular. And he's often returned to the message that Democrats are treating Black Americans as political slaves, which is, by the way, a talking point of the modern GOP.
Yes.
That the Democratic Party takes Black voters for granted. It's their core message to Black voters, and Kanye has really taken that up as his personal standards. And if you look at Kanye as a candidate today, he has a lot in common with Trump in the years prior to 2016. He's a wealthy celebrity with narcissistic tendencies. The list of figures he's compared himself to includes Kurt Cobain, Leonardo da Vinci, Walt Disney, Thomas Edison, Jimi Hendrix, Howard Hughes, Michael Jackson, Steve Jobs, Ralph Lauren, Michelangelo, Jim Morrison, Pablo Picasso, Axl Rose, William Shakespeare, Socrates, William Wallace, Andy Warhol, Anna Wintour, and Willy Wonka.
You left one out.
Who'd I leave out?
Jesus.
Oh.
Remember Yeezus?
Oh, Wikipedia, you have failed me. Thank you for calling that back to my mind. He has compared himself to Jesus. So like Trump, prior to 2016, he has zero experience in public office, but presents himself as the opposite of a politician in that he's a speaker of the truth. And some people are comparing Kanye to Donald Trump, but not the Trump of 2016, who had a national campaign staff and a widespread following among angry white people, but the Trump of maybe 6 or 8 years prior to that, when he first started tweeting about Obama's birth certificate and nailing down the issues and rallying cries that would motivate his base. And so by this timeline, we might see a more credible Kanye West candidacy in 2028 or so.
Yes, that's really well said, Mark. And I have this image in my mind. Even if Trump loses big this year, it's not going to spell the end of Trumpism and the idea that anti-intellectualism and anti-expertise is still going to be the lingua franca of the Republicans going forward, even if Trump loses. And I can see a scenario where a Kanye West is a very appealing candidate to them. Let's get a black guy who is a people person and a narcissist and a populist, and let's elevate him because, maybe that'll get more votes in 2024. I could certainly see that scenario playing out and him being one of the early favorites for the Republican nomination in 2024.
I think that's a fascinating scenario that poses some interesting questions. First off, is Trump's MAGA Confederacy flag waving base ever going to vote for a black man, even someone like Kanye West? Second question, will Kanye West get his pretty obvious mental problems under control where he can maintain stability long enough to complete a political campaign? Or third question, will our standards as a nation have fallen so far that we don't care if someone appears to be flat out unstable and incoherent and we'll elect him anyway?
Well, to your last point, we already did that, right? We elected an incoherent, unstable, mentally deranged con man 4 years ago.
But didn't he tell us all that he's a very stable genius, Donald Trump?
Yes.
I feel like he's on record as saying he's a very stable genius, which now that I say it sounds like exactly the sort of thing that Kanye would say. So, point taken.
Exactly.
Kanye himself has predicted that if God doesn't choose him to be president this time around, and he does believe that God chooses the president, then he almost certainly will be chosen by God in 2024. So get ready for Wakanda innovation with Big Pharma, Joe, because Kanye West is here to tell you that it and he are inevitable.
Well, maybe so. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if the Republicans nominated somebody like Kanye, if not Kanye himself, next time around. But I'm casting my lot with the majority of Americans who are sick and tired of non-professionals manning the store and are ready for a little bit of science and expertise and seriousness and stability and sanity in their government again.
I'm right there with you. Right there with you. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this topic. Are you ready for the question for next time?
Yep, lay it on me.
So I just spent the last 2 weeks considering Kanye West's prospects of having an effect on the Electoral College, which brought to me the question for next time. Why did the Electoral College seem like a good idea when it was first instituted? And is there any good reason for keeping it around today?
Good question. I've been wondering that myself. And when are we taping the next one? October 23rd, right before the election. So that's a really good time to talk about the Electoral College. So I will get on it.
Okay, it'll be perfect.
All right, well, that's it for this edition of Mansplaining. That was Mark. I'm Joe, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye, everybody. That's it for this edition of Mansplaining. Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Thank you for hanging out with us for a little bit, and we'll see you next time.